views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren Jaime. We thank you for joining us here on the show. Somebody asked, what is the Social Justice Forums all about? Well, we are bringing you a forum that provides you a deeper understanding on the inequities of race, also multiple points of view, inequalities, issues that are actually affecting communities of color, and even our most vulnerable populations. When you talk about social justice, it's more than just police brutality. It's racism. It's the elderly. There's a lot of different topics. We're going to discuss it right here on the show. So stay with us because the Social Justice Forum starts right now. And welcome back. Well, in light of the tragedies that have been going on around America over the past month, there's been a demand to address the issue, keeping millions of Americans convicted of felonies from serving on juries. In May of 2019, the New York State Senate passed a bill allowing felons who have completed their sentences to actually serve on juries. The bill was viewed as controversial and died in the assembly. Our next guests believe a fundamental way of dismantling systemic racism, which continues to plague society, includes allowing those with felony convictions to serve on criminal and civil trials. We'll be joined right now to provide their point of view on the matter. I'm joined by the founder of the Haicken Law Group, and Matthew Haicken, and Assistant Professor of Law, Criminology, and Criminal Justice at Cal State Long Beach University, James Binnall. And thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so, I mean, this is a conversation that's been going on for a minute now. We talk about where do actually those who've been convicted of felonies lie. Give us a little bit about this, because as we talk about moving things forward, I know that there is a way and there is some legislation that was on the table to try to bring this to come to pass, but give us a little bit about your perspective on where you see things.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll start out. I kind of came to this sort of as an accidental advocate. I'm just a personal injury lawyer. I don't do criminal defense at all. I do car accidents, slip and falls, construction accidents, that sort of thing. And I met with Senator Brian Benjamin in the end of 2018, just in my capacity as an injury lawyer. And we spoke about certain things that are important to injury lawyers and our clients. It was a nice conversation. He's a great guy. He and I both went to the same college. And then the next day I was looking at his website and I saw he was very interested in criminal justice reform. So I sent an email to somebody at his staff and I just threw it out there and I said, hey, did you guys know felons can't serve on juries? I mean, that's something I heard personal injury lawyers talk about for years, and I can get into why it's important. But there was no response. And then about 7 months later, someone from his staff called me and said, hey, we forgot to tell you, the senator loves your idea. It's about to pass the Senate. So it was really exciting to me. Just go to one meeting, send an email, and then the bill passed the Senate. I said, can you name the bill after me? They said no. But said, that was really hoping for that. But they said it'll definitely pass the Assembly, and Cuomo will probably sign it. But then it became this third rail, and the Republicans and a couple of Democrats, they started having these press conferences, and they were saying things like, we're going to have serial killers on juries, terrorists, and it became this. It was just absurd. And the Democrats in the Assembly, even though they really had the votes, they were, I don't know exactly what happened, but it seems like they were afraid of being called soft on crime. And Democrats in conservative areas in New York, they didn't want to touch it. So it just died in the Assembly and everybody kind of forgot about it. And I was told that, look, it's just not going to happen. And then ever since George Floyd was killed, America has really changed. And I thought, now's the time to do it. So I've been knocking on doors. I had this op-ed published in Bloomberg Law. I just think it's such an important issue. It hasn't really been talked about that much. And I started Googling it. And the person I found who has really done the most research and really knows everything about it, has a book coming out about it, is Professor James Binnall. So I emailed him just out of the blue, he responded. We've been corresponding, and he can really talk about it from from the criminal side, from an academic side. He's got a really inspirational story, and it's frustrating to me that it hasn't really been talked about from the civil side, because when people are injured, the value of their injury is really supposed to be decided by a jury or their peers. And when you're excluding this whole segment of the population, they're really not getting fair compensation.
Yeah. Let me bring James in. And James, thank you so much for being with us and sharing. When we talk about this from, a civil side, from a criminal side, people will say this is illegal. This should not occur. And I know you spend a lot of time working and addressing this matter. So share with us your thoughts and how this affects you.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me first. So it affects me in, first in a personal capacity. I am a person with a felony conviction. I spent a little over 4 years in 2 maximum security state prisons when I was a younger guy. And interestingly, I got out and I went to law school, became an attorney in California. And I tell the story a lot as a way to contextualize this issue. I got called for jury duty. I believe it was 2009. And I showed up. I was a year in the bar. And I was told if I had checked the felony box on the juror questionnaire that I was no longer needed. Interestingly enough, I had sat second chair on a death penalty case in one of the courtrooms right up the hall from where we were doing jury selection about 3 weeks prior as an attorney. So in my mind, I was sort of okay enough to work as an attorney in this very courthouse that was now expelling me from jury service because I had this criminal record. So I started looking into the issue starting then, really. And my first question was, why do we do this? My second question was, why haven't I heard about this before? And what I found was, arguably, we do this for 2 reasons, or at least these are the sort of suggested or proffered reasons we do this. One, because in the criminal context, that is, someone with a felony conviction is likely to acquit, right? In all instances, have sympathy for a criminal defendant. And then we also hear that people with felony convictions simply just don't have the character to serve. Loosely defined, whatever that, apparently we have the character to serve as attorneys, but we don't have the character to serve as a juror, which sort of didn't make sense to me. And so I embarked on what's now been a decades-long research agenda to investigate empirically, do these rationales hold up? And what are the effects that this is having on our jury system? And what I found is that what others have found that have written, on this topic is that these statutes, first, they racially homogenize juries. I mean, there's no way around that. They disproportionately affect folks of color, right? Second is it may actually be harming our jury system. In the mock jury experiments that I've conducted, folks with felony convictions are actively engaged. They are thoughtful. They're well considered, and honestly, I mean, or actually, they apply the law even-handedly, and they assess the facts in a very independent way. So we're losing this experience from our jury system, and arguably making our jury system worse because of it. On the civil rights side, this is, although it isn't a fundamental right, it is an important one, and folks with felony convictions ought to be able to serve as jurors. We hear a lot about voting these days. And we do every election cycle, but on the ground where arguably law happens, right, in courtrooms across the country, we're excluding at this point roughly 21 million Americans from a pretty important civic duty. So that's how I come to this issue. As Matt mentioned, I do have a book coming out. It'll be my first book. It'll be the only book really on the topic. It's called 20 Million Angry Men. The case for including convicted felons in our jury system. And I essentially lay out an empirical argument that suggests that this policy is ill-conceived.
And so we know that it's going to go legislatively the next time round. How do we see things proceeding going forward? I mean, certainly you can make an argument. I think that I've been in several arenas where it's a valid argument. And I think that when people have served their time, they've done their time, and they should be afforded the right to vote. And in a week when, we're celebrating the deaths of John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, great people who've been involved in social justice and also civil rights and voting rights, I think it's important for, America to really revisit this. But where do you see this going as far as going legislatively?
Well, I think in New York, everybody kind of forgot about it. it pretty much died in the spring of 2019. And I spoke with Senator Benjamin. It was on a Zoom call. I think with a bunch of people. He's a great guy, and he just said, it's got to come from the Assembly this time. The Senate basically said the Senate's ready to go, but it's got to come from the Assembly. And there's a Assembly member, Jeffrey and Aubrey, who proposed it, but it's kind of just stuck. And I just don't think that people are really, there just hasn't been that media push for it that there has been. We've gotten a lot of stuff done since the death of George Floyd. In New York, there was a change to the Civil Rights Law 50A. I mean, we're talking about stuff all over the country, taking down statutes. We fired Aunt Jemima. But this is something that's really would have a huge effect on millions of people across the country, and not just on the criminal side, but as far as injury cases in terms of compensation, making sure people get compensated fairly. So I think it's going to just take a lot of media exposure and really putting politicians' feet to the fire. And if we like in New York, if we could get the Assembly to pass it and get it onto Governor Cuomo's desk, I think he would have a really hard time not signing this, because there would just be so much pressure, and he would have to really come up with an answer as to why people shouldn't be able to serve on juries if they have a felony conviction. And
Right.
Just to the one other point on that is, the Republicans and the few Democrats who, they talked about these criminals serving on our juries, and we'll have Son of Sam on a jury, and rapists and terrorists. The vast majority of people who have felony convictions these are crimes of poverty, drugs, petty larceny, this sort of thing. The most people with convictions are not violent murderers who you need to be afraid of. These are people who made a mistake often many years ago, and it just doesn't make sense. And I think if we get this out there, the way voting rights is out there in the public, the politicians would be forced to do the right thing.
Yeah, James, take off the counselor hat for a moment. Give me an opportunity to think about to share with our viewers. What did that feel like for you? I mean, here you are sitting co-counsel on a chair. You're sitting here and you're dealing with a death penalty murder case, and then you find out, like, when it comes to the jury, I can't serve. What did that make you feel like?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty obvious, I think, right? It made me feel like a second-class citizen. It made me feel like what I did, what I had done, my penalty wasn't enough, that this was going to be a perpetual thing, that it was going to be forever, right? That I was going to have these certain things that were always going to remind me of the worst thing I had ever done in my life. I want to just add on to, you asked a little bit about legislation. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm proud to say that California just passed the first more inclusive jury bill on this topic in 2 decades. So we passed SB 310 out here, took effect January 1st or January 2nd, 2020. And that bill restored voter eligibility to folks with felony convictions, with 2 exceptions, unless you were on active state supervision or unless you were a registered sex offender. So I'm glad that there is some topic that is put right up there with voting, and I think it deserves the same kind of attention. But to your earlier point, yeah, it's stigmatizing, right? I'm good enough to be a lawyer, but I'm not good enough to be a juror. I didn't understand the logic at the time, and having done the research now, I still don't understand it. So.
Right. And given what's going on right now, obviously a lot of questions about with social unrest, looking at reforming the criminal justice system, looking at how we deal with police brutality, the repeal of 50A, as we talked about, a lot of traction being given in this area. Are people more receptive, if you will, during a time such as this, or are we still seeing this hard and fast wall when it comes to this particular issue?
I think I'll let James speak about California nationally. All I really know is New York. I think it just hasn't been tested. It passed in New York, as you know, last year, 2018, the Senate flipped, we got Democratic control. And when Senator Benjamin ran with the idea, and God bless him, he put himself out there. He took a lot of flack. It passed the Senate, and then there was this huge backlash. It just hasn't been in the news, and it hasn't been proposed again. And I know that there's been a ton of other very important things that have been going on the civil rights side, and of course with COVID. So it's not like people have been sitting around doing nothing. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I'm sure everybody wants their bill front and center. But it just, I just don't think it's been tested in New York in this new world we're living in. And I think now if there were more stories about it, if the media got more involved, and thank you for allowing us to come on and talk about it. I think once people started realizing the fundamental change it could have on society when people with felony convictions were allowed to be on civil and criminal juries, I think it would start passing in state houses across the country.
Well, and you got to admit that, here's a story like James's story, who brings it out and really gives the full magnitude of, listen, here's a guy, I'm convicted, but after being convicted, I've done my time, and yet and still I've turned around and served the system. I think a lot of people are like, wow, this really can, this really can work. But James, what was the moment for you that said, listen, after doing this, I wanted to get in law? Was it because you felt like the system was unjust during your process, or did you just say, listen, after being in for a minute, this is really what I have a passion for?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the choice to pursue law was not one of, initially, social justice or reform. It was simply making it, finding a career where I could make a living and support a family, and that's what I was looking to do. As I embarked on that and was a 1L and listening in criminal law class to them talk about those people, I started to realize that my background had value in this world and that I could make a difference, and that to not do so was, malpractice. And so I decided to pursue this road and this jury idea and this idea of not being able to serve on jury. I mean, it just sort of came up naturally. A lot of the things that I've written about have come up that way. I've written a little bit about parole and some other things. And so, while I was on it. So it was an interesting experience for me to move into this world as someone with a background. I wasn't sure how receptive the legal community would be. But I will say, I mean, I'm not the only one who has been in prison and who has a serious criminal conviction who's now an attorney. There are many of us across the country. And one last, I want to go back to the legislation for 1 second. I have to give due credit to Senator Nancy Skinner, who proposed SB 310 and ultimately got it through. And when we passed SB 310 in California, or when she did, I should say, I was a very small part of that, testifying on its behalf, given the research. We faced the same arguments that I read about in New York. I had District Attorneys Association say to us, well, we're going to need additional security at the courthouse if you're going to let all these felons come and serve. We had prosecutors say, well, what's going to happen if someone violates their probation or parole while they're sitting in the jury box, to say nothing of the alternates that are there anyway. So we faced the same thing. And I think in California, what won out was the science, right? We had several social scientists and people who study reintegration and reentry. They came to Sacramento and discussed that, look, this is an important issue, and it's an important issue in terms of reentry, and it's an important issue in how this affects the jury.
Yeah.
So my only hope is that in New York, that's sort of the road that they go down.
Certainly, there's some things that can work out for the better. James, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your story, and for also the great work that you're doing in California. Matthew, thank you so much for sharing with us here in New York. And as we see that legislation go forward, hopefully we'll be able to get it across the desk and see the same kind of things that's happening on the West Coast right here on the East Coast. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. All right. Well, we're taking a quick break here on the Social Justice Show. As you saw, we went from the East Coast to the West Coast. We're going to bring it back a little bit more local right after this when we return here in a moment.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting for BronxNet, this is Jennifer Hernandez.
And we are back here to the Social Justice Forum's Duffy and Duffy Law Firm has announced the first of a series of lawsuits being filed against New York nursing homes on behalf of the families of residents who have died as a result of the coronavirus. Although nursing homes were granted immunity during the coronavirus pandemic, the firm contends the facilities are responsible for the injuries that have been caused due to the reckless misconduct and willful gross negligence of the nursing home administration and staff in failing to comply with public health regulations. The allegations are serious. Joining us now to talk more about this and to give us further insight are attorneys with Duffy and Duffy Law. We've got Damien Smith and also Thomas Gallivan. And gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, listen, let's get right at it. When we talk about nursing homes, obviously a big push to be discussed during a time such as this. When we talk about COVID-19, navigating after COVID-19, one of the greatest things that came out of it was the risk of infection and those deaths that occurred in nursing homes. And by your allegation, what you're saying is nursing homes, a lot of them were unprepared. Is that correct, Damien?
Yes, that's correct, Daren. We're saying that these nursing homes knew this was coming. They had infection protocols that were supposed to be in place based upon prior outbreaks and directives that were sent down by the CDC, Medicaid, Medicare guidelines that told these nursing homes to get their infection protocols up to speed and be ready for such a pandemic. And these nursing homes did not do what they were supposed to be doing. We found that certain nursing homes, when this pandemic was coming to fruition, just sat there, waited, didn't do anything to update their protocols, make sure that they were prepared for this. This was a slow developing system that came to our country from China, then through Europe, and the writing was on the wall that this was coming towards us. And then when we had the first outbreak in Washington, it was pretty apparent that the nursing homes were going to be at risk, and these people that are the most vulnerable were going to be at risk, so that these nursing homes really had to be prepared for this. They had to have all their supplies in place beforehand. They had to have their staffing needs and prepare for the staff to be ready for all that was going to be coming, isolating their residents, cleaning the facilities, making sure that they had enough staff to come in if staff ended up getting sick and not coming.
And Thomas, a little bit more here, because when we talk about immunity. The governor had given immunity. There was legal immunity for nursing homes in this particular matter. But even with the immunity, there's still some negligence that you find. So walk us through, how can a nursing home be liable even though there's this immunity thing going on?
Sure. So in this scenario, what immunity means, with limited exception, is that the healthcare industry, basically, so nurses, doctors, nursing homes, and hospitals, are shielded from civil and criminal liability for their misconduct. So in short, the immunity provision, from our perspective, strips individuals and their families of the rights that they're provided under the Constitution, including their right to a jury trial. And unfortunately, the timing of the immunity came to fruition, it seems that the law was passed shortly after lobbyists for the healthcare institution made large donations. More specifically to your question, the way in which these cases can be pursued is if we're able to provide evidence of gross negligence or reckless misconduct on the part of the nursing homes. And really that goes back to a lot of what Damien was just speaking about in terms of the months and even years before the nursing homes. They didn't necessarily have to be on notice of COVID or coronavirus coming, but they needed to be prepared for any type of respiratory virus that could amount to what this amounted to, which is a pandemic.
So walk us through a little bit about what you found, right? And some of the cases, and talk about this negligence that you're alleging in certain cases, if you can, so that way people can get a better perspective as to what you were actually able to uncover during this.
Well, our clients are telling us that these facilities were not prepared. They were not doing anything before the governor shut down the nursing homes to visitations. So they were telling us that they were allowed to freely walk into the nursing homes. There were no protocols to have people wearing masks. There were no protocols for hand sanitizing of visitors and people walking in and out of the nursing homes. And then once people started to get sick in the nursing homes, there still was no staff wearing masks. They were very short-staffed in the nursing homes, and they just weren't ready for this at all. And to contrast that, there are several nursing homes that did the right thing, and they were ready for this, and they were on the forefront of this, and they took extra precautions to make sure that their residents were safe. It's just that some of these nursing homes, the ones that are in our lawsuits, just didn't do what they were supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And so the question, I guess, is really, on what grounds then, really, can you really get this lawsuit out there? And of course, you feel as though you have reasonable grounds. What are the grounds right now that you have that you're going forward with the lawsuit?
Well, there's the lack of preparedness, specifically having infection protocols in place before any type of pandemic was coming to this nursing home. That they had to have an emergency plan in place. They had to have a plan for isolating patients, a plan for subsidizing staff if there was an outbreak within the staff. They had to have a plan to transfer patients and isolate patients within the nursing home. And that's the key to the success rate of the facilities that were able to control this particular pandemic, and the ones that were not able to do it. And then once the pandemic really started to affect the nursing homes, it was almost too late for them to change the course of what was going to happen. As this saying goes, the horse was already out of the barn. There was nothing really they could do. The staff started to not call in sick to work, and they were they didn't have enough PPE, things that should have been in supply way before any type of pandemic came to the nursing home.
Yeah. I know one of the other issues that you're dealing with and trying to address in your lawsuit deals with the notification of those who've lost loved ones in that nursing home due to COVID-19. I know firsthand that notification is a sensitive matter, but then I know in the case of some nursing homes, that sensitivity just wasn't there. I know that there's something that you guys are very front and center on. Share with us a little bit about that and what troubles you there.
Sure. I can talk a little bit about that. The communication is always important for nursing homes to be in contact with the family members and or the resident themselves if they're competent. But here, in this scenario where families weren't allowed to visit, it became all that more important. And again, I think that there are instances that we've seen where some nursing homes were great at it. They kept in contact. They sent out memos to family members to tell them exactly what they were doing to try and either keep the virus from getting into the facility in the first place, or then if it did get into the facility, trying to contain it. And then on the flip side, which are the defendants in a lot of the cases that we're pursuing, they did exactly the opposite. They were not in communication with family members. I spoke with someone this morning that their father had a fever for 6 days, and this is in June. They were never told about it until he was sent to the hospital and died the same day. That was a clear indication that person was or potentially was COVID positive. That type of lack of communication is unacceptable. A lot of what we've been talking about and all of these preventative measures that are new to us, like wearing masks outside or staying 6 feet apart, those are things that the nursing home owners and administrators should have had on their radar way before they came into our regular vernacular and our regular way of living. They have the most vulnerable population with them on a day-to-day basis. They're supposed to have infection control protocols in place way before we'd even heard of the coronavirus. And the fact that they failed these families is tragic. Damien mentioned it earlier. A lot of the death totals in the facilities are heartbreaking, but you can also see that there were plenty of facilities that did the right thing and have 0 or 1 death. There can only be a couple of reasons for that, and preparedness is the big one for us.
Yeah. I failed to mention, would you please share with our viewers those nursing homes that you have filed lawsuits against?
The ones that are filed at this point are against Isabella Geriatric and Parker Jewish. Those were facilities, like we said, that had high death totals and had some of the problems that we've been talking about for the last 10 or so minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where do you see things going from here? I mean, obviously you want to see reform and obviously justice for families. Talk to us about how you see things playing out in the future. What's going to happen?
Well, one thing is that there is a bill in Albany right now to revoke the immunity privilege that was granted by the legislature. So we're hopeful that will pass. But if it doesn't pass, we're just hopeful that some of the public outcry is for justice nowadays in all aspects of our society, and that people are going to be frustrated about what happened to their loved ones or what they saw happen to friends and family of people that were in these nursing homes and weren't able to get closure, weren't able to get communication, and weren't able to get care, and were essentially shut off and lost those precious last moments that you have with your loved one.
And are you a little bit concerned, given the fact that we're talking about possibly a second wave here coming to New York City? I mean, granted, we're not even out of the first wave, and much of New York State is still trying to navigate that first wave. But talk to us about the potential for a second wave. Is there anything that you would want to tell families or potential people that may have to deal with this issue front and center with a possible second wave coming around the corner?
Well, I would always tell the family members to be proactive in the care of your loved one. You have to be vocal. You have to know what's going on. In one of our cases that we're investigating, their father was only in the nursing home for short-term rehab, and they never got a chance to take him out. They could have easily taken him out of the nursing home and had the rehab at home. He was not an older man. He just had a surgery and was requiring some short-term rehab, and the facility never gave them notice. They basically locked the doors, and they had no chance to take him out of there. And then he ended up getting COVID and passing away without them being able to say goodbye to him.
Right. So with the immunity law, the way that it is right now, we know that the immunity laws are there. There is a push to actually take this immunity away. Is that something as a legal counsel that you would like to see the immunity actually taken away, or do you think that it's a good measure that's actually in place?
I don't think that the immunity privilege should be in there at all. I don't know why they would give immunity to people who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Let the judge and the jury system decide if the facility acted appropriately and did all they could do in light of what was going on. That would be fine. That's the way our justice system is set up, to just give blanket immunity for no reason other than just to protect these facilities. Doesn't make any sense to us.
Right. And about how many families are you guys dealing with presently as of now?
We have close to 100 cases that we're investigating. There's a limited amount that we've gone ahead and filed the lawsuits, but we get calls every day. As sad as that is, it's still going on.
Are they from the same nursing homes that you're getting the phone calls from, or are they different ones?
It varies. Some of the obviously the nursing homes with the higher death totals are a significant portion of the calls that we're getting because of it seems clear that there were failures at those facilities.
And I think a lot of families just want answers, so they're just calling to know what they can do, because they were in the dark the whole time and had no idea what really happened to them and if they have any remedy at all.
Yeah. So if families do need to get in touch with you, please put your information out there. How do they get in touch with you if they feel like they've been wronged?
Well, they can always call us at Duffy and Duffy Law at 516-394-4200. And we have people waiting by to take any phone calls at all times.
Yeah. Well, Damien and Thomas, thank you so much for sharing with us. Of course, we want to continue to follow this story as it affects not just those in New York City and the Bronx, but of course, all across New York State, as nursing homes are certainly under fire. As you said, many have done a great job, but there's some that definitely have to be brought to accountability. And I think that that's what you got going. So we'll continue to follow up and check in with you as things progress. Damien and Thomas, thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums.
Thank you, Daren.
Thank you, Daren. Have a good day.
All right. Well, listen, we got to take a quick break. We do have more show. Stay with us. We're coming right back right after this.
When taking public transportation, don't touch your phone. Carry hand sanitizer and use it immediately upon leaving the bus or train. Avoid touching your face. If someone is coughing or sneezing, move away. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as possible. Limit contact with poles. If possible, avoid rush hour. Don't eat or drink on public transportation. Keep your bag off the floor or other surfaces. Avoid directly touching turnstiles. Stay up to date with the latest from your local health department and CDC.
show. Make the Road New York is one of the largest progressive grassroots immigrant-led organizations in New York State. The organization actually tackles the issue of workers' rights, as well as immigrant and civil rights, environmental, as well as housing justice. And Make the Road is also dealing with organizing and building leadership of community members who are eager to fight for housing equality as also environmental justice. And here to share a little bit more about the great work that they do with boots on the ground on this matter, I'm joined by the lead organizer, I should say, for Make the Road New York, Ms. Jennifer Hernandez. And Jennifer, good to have you.
Hi, good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to share some of the work that Make the Road is doing, especially during
I
this
think it's
hard
important.
time.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think it's important. I think you guys are doing great work during this time. And as we talk about New York City and all of the people who've been affected by COVID-19, I know the immigrant population is huge in that number. So just walk us a little bit through some of the challenges that you're finding the immigrant community has post COVID-19.
Well, as we know, right, we're not in a post-COVID-19 world yet. But yeah, for sure, the immigrant community, especially right, the undocumented community in New York, has been one of the hardest hit due to this pandemic. Largely, of course, due to the status, right, and the sort of resources that the immigrant undocumented community can access or cannot access, to better say that. So as you mentioned, right, we have over 24,000 members, and at the beginning of the pandemic, we really saw that there was just a lot of destruction in the community. So for undocumented folks, right, that have lost their jobs, they don't have sort of a safety net, right, of unemployment payments. They don't have, they weren't able to get the stimulus check, right? So for a lot of our folks and a lot of our membership, they have literally had a zero income during this pandemic. And while some of them are starting to go back to work, they're in debt, right? Some of them are still getting better from COVID. We actually had lost over 80 members to COVID, and so it's been just a really difficult time. And at Make the Road, we've sort of reshifted our priorities to be able to tackle issues that we see and to make sure that legislation is passed so that our community can actually survive this.
Yeah. Certainly, our prayers and condolences go out to you losing 80 members. I think New York City, it's hard to somebody who's in some way, shape, or form been affected by those who've actually lost loved ones during COVID-19. And so 80 is a huge number. Wanted to let you know that we're definitely thinking of you and praying for you. But let me just take you before COVID for a minute, because before COVID, you guys are doing some great work and still are doing some great work. A little bit about your organization and the work that you were doing in helping families of immigrants.
Yeah, so Make the Road, right, is a organization that builds the power of immigrants and working class folks to achieve dignity and justice. So even before COVID, as you said, yes, we've been working on multiple issues. We work on workers' rights, on housing rights, immigrant rights. We work on police accountability. And so part of our work is to make sure that the people that are directly affected are centered in this fight and are the ones leading this fight and deciding what bills we're pushing and what actions we're taking to make sure that our community is protected and that they have all that they need to be able to survive. And again, right, I think we see that disparities were already there, right? And a lot of injustices were already there. And COVID sort of, really, really increased just visually how much we can see these injustices, but they were already there, right? And so we continue this fight, and we continue to hopefully advocate for a bunch of bills. But at the moment, we are focusing on 3 bills that include a funding of excluded workers. So, like again, I said, undocumented folks are not able to access unemployment benefits, right, due to immigrant status. They're also not able to access federal stimulus money. And so we are fighting for a excluded workers fund which would basically work sort of like unemployment fund for undocumented workers to be able to survive. Number two, we're working on pushing the cancel rent demand, right? We know that in New York City, especially, right, the rent prices were already outrageous, and a lot of folks already lacked a lot of protections as renters. And again, since a lot of folks have not had any sort of income, and this isn't only for undocumented folks, right? This is for general population. A lot of folks owe up to 4 months of rent at the moment. And we know that while the eviction moratorium that happened in New York State, that basically, stopped any evictions, was a good step. It wasn't a solution, right? People still owe that money and can still be sued to be evicted. So that's another one of our main goals, to cancel rent, and we have some bills that we're pushing for that. And then the third is to decarcerate prisons and jails and detention centers. We know that these places are conducive to the expansion of COVID, and people can't really take safety measures like they should. And so we're also pushing that demand. So we have 3 demands right now that we're pushing for, and our members are out there fighting every day to make sure that we survive this.
Yeah, let me walk back for a second and go back to when you talk about rent and your fight for rent cancellation. A lot of people say rent cancellation is necessary. Looking in New York, rent prices are astronomically high, and trying to make it in New York City pre-COVID was already a challenge for many. But with rent cancellation and your fight for rent cancellation, let's play it out in its worst case scenario. If you don't get rent cancellation, how does that impact those who are in the immigrant community and those people that you serve if there is no rent cancellation?
Yeah, and so one of the things that, of course, we've been saying for a long time, right, as housing organizers, is that if we don't find a solution to help folks pay their rent or to cancel rent, that there's going to be a big wave of evictions that will start as soon as the moratorium is lifted, right? And so we began to see that the lifting of various parts of the eviction moratorium. So as of right now, up until August 5th, no cases are sort of moving forward. But after that, we know that we will start to see a big wave of evictions if we don't get to a solution. I think especially for undocumented folks, there's a lot of fear of retaliation, right, when it comes to immigration status. And again, there's a lot of lack to access to various sort of programs that help you financially. And so it is extremely hard, right? So the only way that we can get to a place where everybody is safe and everybody has a chance to fight and stay in their homes is through a universal cancellation of rent, which is what we're pushing. Because again, right, people, like you mentioned, we're already living paycheck to paycheck in a lot of places in New York City. And so to think that people are gonna magically have 4 months worth of back rent to pay at the end of this pandemic, when job security is not necessarily there, when the economy is not doing well, that's just absurd.
Yeah. And I want to share a little bit more talking about housing for a moment, because when we talk about housing, you got the rent situation, but then you also have the living situation. And when we talk about living, talking about living conditions, and sometimes many are forced to have to live in hazardous conditions, to say, put it bluntly, a lot of hazardous conditions. What are you finding by way of immigrant housing? And I know that you've got a push for a cleaner and a more greener New York as well.
Yeah, so again, right, for undocumented families, especially for low wage workers, a lot of the times, right, people have to double up in apartments, right? There's a full family that's living in 1 bedroom, right? If you have 2, 3 bedrooms, like there's a family in each of the bedrooms, right? Because that's the only way you can actually afford an apartment. And so that, of course, didn't help and does not continue to help in terms of being safe and exercising in social distance. So we saw a lot of that, especially during the spike, right? A lot of people that couldn't necessarily self-isolate, right? If you have roommates. a lot of folks that again live in maybe illegal units, right, basements, attics, right, because they can't, that's all they can afford, which again don't help with something like COVID, right, that is very respiratory. And yeah, we continue to push for legislation, right, that makes housing greener, that makes sure that people have affordable housing and a place with dignity, where they can have their families and not sort of be afraid of being left out in the street and of not having enough room or that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I want to, if you take a moment and allow our viewers to get a little bit of your perspective on what environmental justice looks like and sounds like. When we talk about social justice, many people have always affirmed it to just be police brutality and the issues of police and criminal justice. But we know that social justice is far more than that. It deals with housing. It also deals with environmental justice. So for somebody who's watching right now, wants to know a little bit more about how do you define environmental justice and how it affects you, what would you tell people?
Yeah. I mean, I think especially during these last years, right, for the immigrant community and for low wage workers, right, we've seen that there's a big shift in sort of immigration, right, of people that are coming from countries that have been devastated, right, in terms of climate, right, where you have climate disasters and people have to migrate, or you have to migrate because large corporations have taken over, right, your homes and have destroyed your land and have trashed your land, right? And so we've seen a big shift in that, right, in terms of immigration and the connection in terms of climate justice and immigration, right? That a lot of the times in recent years, right, like immigration is not just economic, right? Of course, there's a certain part of it that's economic, but it's also due to the climate, right? And people that can't grow food anymore when they used to, right? Because of climate change, right? And excessive heat and lack of rain. And so I think that, for example, when we talk about climate, we always talk about things that an individual can change, right? Recycling and all those things, right? But the truth is, right, that the large corporations are the ones that are at fault for a lot of these climate issues that we have, right? And they're not being held accountable. They're not being taxed. They're not being, prosecuted the way that they should, and are the real sort of the real villains in terms of like the climate crisis, right? But a lot of and so one of the big aims for us at Make the Road New York is to start sort of having that education and sharing that education with our members, right? And thinking about how these corporations are responsible, and how, yes, we can also change, right, our behaviors, but how systematically, right, we're sort of turning the responsibility into the individual instead of like this systematic, you know, way in which corporations avoid accountability, right, for this climate crisis.
Right. Walking people through getting to know their rights, because we do know in the immigrant community in a lot of places, and you don't necessarily have to be an immigrant. I think a lot of times you can just be an average New Yorker. You walk around and you just simply don't know your rights when it comes to this. But I know that your organization spends a lot of time in trying to educate people in knowing their rights. How do you go about letting people know what their rights are?
Mm-hmm. And so pre-COVID, right, we would have committee meetings, right? One day a week, each committee would hold sort of like a dinner space, and we would do Know Your Rights workshops. At the moment, we're actually having workshops and Know Your Rights sessions on Tuesdays and on Thursday evenings on Facebook Live, right? So because we have switched our mode. And so we're doing that. We're doing Know Your Rights in terms of immigration, right? What to do if immigration comes knocking at your door or at your workplace or whatever it is. What are your rights as a worker, right? Minimum wage, paid sick leave, all that kind of stuff. What are your rights as a tenant, right? If your rent's stabilized, sort of what are your rights and how you can put complaints and make sure that your landlord is fixing up your place and all that.
Have you heard anything about ICE with regards since COVID-19 has been going on? A lot of people been isolated at home. Have you heard a lot of activity with ICE in terms of at least arrests? I know there can't be deportations because we are in the midst of COVID-19, but it's certainly on the port of arrests and infiltration. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so we actually have heard that there has been a start of arrests again in the last week or so. So we've heard that. We've also heard of people being transferred from from one detention center to another, which usually means that detention centers are trying to make space for new arrests. So we have heard that. It's still sort of on the low range. It is starting up again, and so we have started again to conduct our Know Your Rights workshop and to make sure that we support families that come in contact with ICE.
Yeah. So before we go, people want to know more about your organization. How can they get in touch?
Yeah, so you can get in touch with us through Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram, but you can also we have 5 offices around New York. And so to find our phone numbers for each of those offices, you can go to maketheroadny.org. And our offices are in Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Long Island, and White Plains.
Well, Jennifer Hernandez, thank you so much for sharing with us here. Make the Road, a very important organization here in New York. Make the Road New York, doing great work with the immigrant community. Thank you for taking the time to share with us a little bit here on the Social Justice Forum. Thank you much.
Thank you.
All righty. Thank you. Well, listen, want to let our viewers know we've come to the end of our show today. And yes, you've been watching the Social Justice Forum. If you've enjoyed this week's discussion on the Social Justice Forum, you know what we do? We invite you. Come back. Join us next week. We'll have more guests. We'll have more topics. We'll have more information. I hope that you're getting something out of these shows. When we talk about what social justice is about, as I said, it's not just about police brutality. It's about housing. It's about healthy living. It's about all these things that impact communities that are vulnerable and those that are underrepresented. We're talking about all those issues here on the Social Justice Forum. Daren Jaime here with you saying thank you for watching. We'll check you out next week on the Social Justice Forum.